You've tried to stop before. Maybe dozens of times. You set a date, made a promise, told yourself this time would be different. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks it was. Then something happened. Stress, boredom, a bad night, a familiar feeling you couldn't name. And you went back. And then came the story. You told yourself about why. That story is the most dangerous thing about your addiction. Not the habit. Not the substance. Not the behavior. The story. Because the story you told yourself, the one that felt honest, even obvious, was that you failed because something is wrong with you. You lack discipline. You're weak. Other people manage to quit. Why can't you? That story is a lie. And it is a lie that is keeping you sick. Because every time you tried to stop through sheer willpower, you were doing the equivalent of treating a broken leg by telling it to walk faster. You weren't addressing the wrong behavior. You were addressing the wrong problem entirely. Asterisk. Every treatment program that has ever failed you started from the same assumption that the problem is the behavior. Stop the behavior, solve the problem, white-knuckled through the craving, replace the habit, build a streak. The logic seems airtight until the fourth relapse, the fifth, the 10th, when it becomes impossible to ignore that. Something more fundamental is going on. The behavior is not the problem. The behavior is the answer to the problem. Gabor Maté spent decades working with some of the most severely addicted people in North America. Heroin users, crack addicts, people that polite society had long since written off. At the Portland Hotel in Vancouver's downtown Eastside, one of the most concentrated pockets of addiction in the world. What he found wasn't moral failure. It wasn't weakness. He found pain, overwhelming, unprocessed, often invisible pain that had never been given the right name or the right container mate. Defines addiction not by the substance consumed, but by the function it serves. Any behavior that a person compulsively returns to despite negative consequences. That provides temporary relief from internal distress. That means the heroin addict and the person who cannot stop checking their phone at 2 a.m. are operating from the same underlying dynamic. The drug is different. The logic is identical. Something hurts, and this makes it stop hurting for a while. The brain's opioid system, the same system that external opiates hijack, is responsible for regulating emotional pain, physical pain, and the experience of human connection. These are not separate systems. They are the same system. Addiction is what the search for relief looks like when it finds something that works. This is why just stop is not a strategy. You cannot remove a solution without addressing the problem it was solving. Asterisk, most people, when they think about the origin of their addiction, point to the moment they first used. The first drink, the first hit, the first time the screen swallowed 3 hours, whole, and it felt like nothing. That moment feels like the beginning. It is in single quotes. By the time you found the substance, the wound was already decades old. Maté was unambiguous about this. In every severe case of addiction he encountered, without exception, there was a history. Not always dramatic, not always what you'd recognize as trauma if someone asked you directly. Sometimes it was overt, abuse, neglect, violence in the home. But sometimes it was quieter than that. A household where emotions were never named, where vulnerability was punished with silence, where a child learned early that their inner world was not safe to express. That is still damage. The child's brain is not a finished organ. 90% of its circuitry is wired after birth, shaped directly by the quality of the emotional environment. Develops inside. A child who grows up with consistent, attuned caregiving develops a nervous system that can regulate itself, that can tolerate discomfort, return to baseline, process difficult emotion without being overwhelmed. The shame of having decided with full sincerity that this time would be different, of having meant it, and then watching yourself do the thing anyway, as if some other person inside you had made a different decision entirely. That experience is not a moral failure. It is a neurological description. Mate's clinical work pointed consistently toward a specific region of the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, the area responsible for weighing consequences, inhibiting impulse, and balancing short-term desire against long-term well-being. In a healthy brain, this is what interrupts the reach toward and inserts the thought, this will cost you more than it gives you. In the addicted brain, that region is compromised, not metaphorically, structurally. And here is what makes this devastating. The same early adversity that creates the emotional wound also impairs the development of the very system. You would need to regulate the response to that wound. The trauma doesn't just create the pain, it disables the circuit that would allow you to manage it. So when you stood in front of that mirror and promised yourself you were done, you were making a sincere commitment with a system that was structurally incapable of keeping it under pressure. Willpower was never the variable. It was never the thing that separated people who recovered from people who didn't. What separated them was whether the underlying pain was addressed, whether the nervous system had tools to regulate itself, whether the person had enough genuine connection to make sobriety feel like something other than deprivation. And every time you called yourself weak, every time you told yourself a stronger person would have stopped by, no, you would have poured an accelerant on the fire you were trying to put out. The self-hatred was not motivating you. It was feeding the cycle. Asterisk, everything you have been told about recovery centers on subtraction. Remove the substance. Eliminate the behavior. Build walls between yourself and the thing that is destroying you. The work Mate points toward is not behavioral. It is archaeological. You are not trying to build better habits on top of an old wound. You are trying to go back down into the wound, understand what it was, and give it what it never received. The first step is not sobriety. It is honesty, not the performed honesty of a confessional, but a quieter, more precise form of self-examination. When the urge arrives, before you act on it, you pause long enough to ask, what am I feeling right now that I am trying not to feel? That question sounds simple. It is not. Loneliness registers as restlessness. Grief registers as boredom. Shame registers as anger. The addiction has been translating for so long that you have forgotten the original language. Learning to read that language again is the entire project. Mate was explicit. Trauma stored in the body cannot be fully processed through insight alone. Understanding why you are the way you are does not automatically release the physiological imprint of what happened to you. What actually turned patients around was not always clinical intervention. It was the arrival of real connection, a relationship where they were known without being managed, a community where belonging was not contingent on performance. Sometimes a single person who looked at them with recognition rather than judgment was enough to begin the thaw. Self-compassion matters here, and it is worth being precise about what that means. It does not mean excusing the damage your addiction has caused. It means recognizing that the behavior you are ashamed of arose from a wound that was real. In a person who was doing the only thing they knew how to do with pain they had no tools to process, you were not weak. You were unequipped. Those are not the same thing. The last piece, the one requiring the most courage, is this. You have to build a life that makes sobriety feel like gain rather than loss. If the world you return to after quitting is still empty, still isolating, still devoid of meaning or genuine connection, the brain will do the math. It will conclude correctly that the addiction was offering something real that sobriety is not. You don't defeat that calculation by wanting sobriety more. You defeat it by making the life itself worth staying present. 4. There will be relapses for many people, not as proof of failure, but as information about which parts of the wound are still open, which doors are still missing, which connections have not yet been built. What matters is not the relapse. It is what you do with what it shows you, mates. S. most radical insistence was not a clinical argument. It was a moral one. Compassion, not contempt, is the only foundation on which genuine recovery can be built. Asterisk every system that has tried to shame or punish people out of addiction has failed. Not occasionally. Structurally. Predictably. Always you are not your addiction. You are the person it was protecting. If this video cracked something open in you, sit with that. Don't rush to close it. Write something down. Say something out loud to someone you trust. That discomfort you're feeling right now is not a problem to solve. It is the beginning of the only process that has ever actually worked.